Welcome to the Explorer Poet Podcast, an exploration of the blurry line separating our physical world from our abstract realities. Conversations and stories, myths and reality, science and the gods we worship, the esoteric and the everyday. Come explore with me. Okay, hi Mina. Welcome to the Explorer Poet Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. When I came across your content online, it was through Twitter. And I noticed that you've got this kind of mystical, kind of esoteric, almost kind of like ethereal look to your Twitter account. And so it drew me into your blog, which I find really interesting because you have these great images that are, I don't know, the image themselves are full of like symbology. And you go through in these short clips and kind of talk about almost like an explanation of these different aspects of kind of this symbolic version of life or the symbolic reality. And I mean, I love that kind of stuff. Like the purpose of this podcast, or kind of the purpose of it, was just to have great conversations. But the direction that I wanted to go was kind of exploring that blurry line between our physical world and then this abstract reality that we actually live in. And so that's what drew me to your website. And so starting off, I'm just really curious about how you got into that world, where you started off, what your early childhood was like, and kind of when did you get drawn into that, and what pulled you towards it?
Okay. I was raised a fundamental Christian, Southern Baptist to be specific. So I had a pretty good grip on the Old New Testament, but circumstances in my life pushed me towards reevaluating my belief system. And I found that as I started to look into other religions, that there were a lot of parallels as far as the historical beginnings. And so what you're talking about within um, my website, in my blog, I do lean towards the metaphysical. That's rather where my research took me. Of course, it took me many years to get there. When I first came out of the church, I think a lot of people, when they start to question their beliefs, they'll like sidestep over to maybe I should just go to, uh, you know, if you're a Baptist, go to Methodist and see how that is. But staying within the realm of Christianity, and there's a lot of fear in trying to step out of that arena. But as I started studying, I actually got deeper understanding, and not to give any disrespect whatsoever towards the Bible, I have found that it is like a grimoire that has a lot of formulas, information on how to conduct your life, that you can take into any belief system, really, because we're looking at morals and various values that people hold. Early on, I started writing poetry, and eventually in my late teens I got into writing lyrics. At that time, most of that expression came through music in the church, and then I performed either as a single act or also eventually in bands. And of course, as I came out of the church, my focus on my writing became more esoteric, as you say. I'm not looking to proselyte anybody into my beliefs or shake their belief system, because I truly believe that we should leave people where they're at. I don't want to shake their world, or it may be the only thing they're really holding on to. So I try to be more subtle though in my writings I can be, blatant in my beliefs, I also try to be a little cryptic in my expression. Um,
What was that word that you used? Did you say grimoires?
Grimoire, yeah.
Yeah. So you said the Bible is like a grimoire?
I believe it is.
Yeah. It,
It's like a big book of spells.
that's what a grimoire is a big book of
Yeah.
spells.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's an individual thing that a person would it's sort of a journaling of your spiritual activity in a lot of ways. And when you look at the Bible, it is journaling of, this guy made a mistake here. So, it's more like a book of mistakes in a lot of ways. But in a lot of ways, if you look into it, and especially when you get into the New Testament, then the parables and whatnot begin to give you in-depth teaching. So
Yeah, and it's in an interesting way. The Old and New Testament are so different, and it almost seems like the first real teacher that came along was Jesus, because before that it was just, this is what happened to the people, this is how their prophet responded, this is how their God responded, this is how their enemies responded. But the first
mhm.
person who came along and really was teaching from their own thoughts, because obviously Jesus's message was very different from the Old Testament message. And everybody in the Old Testament was pretty much in line. It was about obedience, obedience, obedience. And then Jesus came along and was like, maybe we could just be good people.
Yeah, there's a novel idea. So, I don't profess to be like a scholar in any of the things that I studied, but at a certain point, well, actually, when the Police, the band, put out their song Synchronicity, that drew me to the Jungian thought. At that point, I went to the library and I studied anything I could get my hands on. Of course, we didn't have the internet at that time. So I'd have to go down and use their reference section, and I wrote copious notes trying to understand his um, his point of view, his theories, and his teachings. So that does, you can see probably from my writings that's a big influence for me. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I have a pretty similar story as far as being raised in a fundamentalist religion. You said fundamentalist Christianity,
yes, yeah.
or maybe evangelical Christianity, but Southern Baptist being that. But I was raised LDS or Mormon, and so I think probably like the understanding of Christian doctrine was probably pretty different. In fact, when I was growing up, we always considered ourselves Christian. It wasn't until I stepped away from the religion of my childhood, and I started doing the same thing where I was reading about other faiths, other religions, the history of Christianity in general, when I realized like how very different the interpretation of Christianity was. Mormonism is almost more like Catholicism, where there's like a requirement of works. So I don't know exactly how Catholicism operates, but in the Mormon faith, you're not just saved by Jesus alone, you're saved by his grace as after everything that you could possibly do. And so without all of that, like without that effort to actually do something, you weren't saved. So it was always very fascinating to me how how other religions didn't consider Mormonism Christianity, even though we did. And then to grow up and study other Christian faiths and then realize like, oh, like we are very different. It's like a very different approach. But I had a similar experience where the symbols of my religion fell away from me. They didn't have any hold on me.
Mhm.
I guess that's like the psychological way of saying it. The true experience was that emotionally, I'd always felt a dissonance, like a discomfort. And I just hadn't been taught to trust my body or my emotions. And so I had always just relied on kind of like some kind of cognitive, half-cocked kind of logical reason for staying in. And a lot of it was probably just like social pressure.
Yeah.
Or just that's like the world I knew. It was like the only world I knew. I didn't know anything outside of it. But once I got to a place where like logically I just couldn't wrap my head around it anymore. I couldn't keep doing the mental gymnastics. Once I paired that with the emotional discomfort that I always felt, it was actually really quickly that the whole thing just kind of lost its grasp on me. Um, but you probably, in the way that you went in search of other information, I almost think of it like a framework for your existence. So like as humans, it's necessary that we have a story to base ourselves on. It's just the way that the human mind works. And so we all, this is very Jungian, like we're all operating on some myth, whether or not we understand it. And so the myth that I had consciously been operating on fell away. And so I didn't have a framework to understand existence, to understand my life, to understand purpose. And so I went on this explorative journey, I guess, where I was reading. I dove deep into science. I dove deep into psychology. And Jungian psychology is not mainstream. It's like outside the mainstream. In fact, most Jungian psychologists or psychoanalysts, the insurance companies won't even pay for people to go to a Jungian psychoanalyst, which means it's definitely outside, the priestcraft of the time. But what I found was the model of the human psyche and how you could extrapolate that from the individual up to the greater society, and it still worked. That's what helped me. I don't take it as literal, but it's just a model that really helps me understand myself and understand other people as well.
I like the way you put that, about having to have a framework to hold on to. And I think that's the most disconcerting thing when people try to make a change in their belief system. Um, One of the things that I really pay a lot of attention to within the Jungian thought is the shadow work. I think we all stay in shadow work. And that's akin to alchemy and the process of alchemy, but not your laboratory alchemy, but more your spiritual alchemy. And I think of the parable that Jesus said about the seed falling to the ground and dying and come forth and bringing life, which is really, if you go through the steps of spiritual alchemy, it is just that, the chaos at the beginning, which is, just our basic self, and having to go through the fire where the ash is burnt, bringing it up and through the water, then through, I guess, the air for the separation, and then you go into the earth, which, is like where all the nutrition is really of your life, is in the soil. If you've ever done any gardening or whatnot, then you can understand that concept. But to me, that's a metaphysical explanation for the changes that we go through, um, when you find yourself down in a depressive cycle. And I think we all have cycles like that. Some are darker than others. And that's not to minimize people who, have clinical issues, but I'm speaking of just everyday life can bring you into these cycles. And I just say, oh, here I am back down and walking in the shadow again. Uh, so a lot of that started going into my writing process. I've written a lot of poetry. Like I said, I've written a lot of lyrics. I've actually performed some of these lyrics. And I'm 75 years old, so I'm at the in the process of making a collection of all my past lyrics, my poetry. I'm going to put that into a collection. I'm hoping to be able to get that out by the end of the year. Really wanted to start doing that just as a way to be able to have something to pass on to my offspring. I have a a huge. I have a lot of children and grandchildren and whatnot, so I thought that would be a good way to do it. But I'm entitling it "The Unbearable Aching." So that's kind of where I pull my energy from, and it'll sort of give a profile of me. Um,
Is that what would you say that that's been your approach to shadow work is poetry or just writing it out?
I have so many note cards around. Yeah. I write things down all the time. I may wake up in the middle of the night and grab my phone and start putting something into my note section. I have also a history of working as a political activist, mostly in the anti-war era, the Vietnam anti-war protests, and some to do with I guess, the missile system. My father was uh, he was a engineer, a rocket engineer. So we moved around quite a bit. I got exposed quite a bit to that whole industry. We lived in White Sands and Redstone Arsenal and NASA. I was there a couple of times. I mean, we moved about every year. So I had to quickly learn how to make friends or not make friends. And just mostly I would be by myself because we moved so much. And so I would express myself through my poetry. And at a certain point, then, I know we were talking about my early life, but then I went through my life and got to my retirement. And once I got to my retirement, I did my due diligence that every senior citizen does, and I watched every single show I could possibly watch on TV and binged all the shows that I had missed while I was working. But I ran out of that material, so I decided to write a book. And I actually wrote the book as, and I'm speaking of transition, I actually wrote it out of boredom because, I just couldn't find anything else and I wanted something to entertain me. So I started sitting down writing it, and I found it kind of easy to create my characters. I think I counted at a certain point, I had 59 characters in my first book. um, but each one of those characters are something that impressed me in my life. I might have known somebody, I might have, um, picked up on a situation just through the news, who knows? Um, but I found it very easy to make these characters. And it was cathartic in a lot of ways for me to get this out. And some of the circumstances in the book were actually things that I experienced, different dramas, not all of them, because some of them are outside the realm of reality because it is a sci-fi fantasy type book. But like when my first husband was drafted for the Vietnam War, and we were uh, had a coffee house in this military town, and of course we were protesting the war. Well, there were sorry, there were a lot of people that didn't like it, and we were having some special speakers, people like Stokely Carmichael and Jane Fonda and whatnot would come down. Um, it was a pretty big base there, important base. Not that they all aren't, but we had a bomb threat while we were at our um, when one of the speakers were there. So I wrote that. I don't know if you remember that, but I wrote that into my book at a
Yeah.
certain point.
Yeah, I do
That
remember
was,
that.
yeah, that was something that really was a memory, of things that I experienced. But one thing you spoke of that I really liked was just recently here is that, people are having that in religions that want to make divisions with each other, and that's one of the things that I think caused me to want to come out of an organized religion and try to see what my heart was trying to say in life, because um, I don't want to necessarily uh, have ill feelings towards, my neighbor because they don't believe like I believe. It's very important to me that I try to accept other people as they are. And I wrote a blog, one of my blogs. Some of my blogs are longer than the succinct ones that you're speaking of on social artistry. And I came upon that term from a woman by the name of Jean Houston, who worked within the human potential movement. And she considered herself to be a planetary citizen. And that's actually someone who moves comfortably between cultures, um, where you are capable of understanding and honoring the other culture's belief system. And so today, I believe that membrane is very thin. It used to be, people kept to themselves and they're in their little tribe, and then now we've got worldwide communication capability, we need to be able to accept, communicate, and we don't have to merge with everybody's belief system, but we do have to be aware and open and understanding to that belief system before we start making rash decisions on what they are or aren't. Are you saved? Are you not saved? Going back to the lingo that is, within organized religion.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting to, so in your story, you grew up religious and like in America, a religious family, but also your dad working in the rocket space. Um, so probably also, it sounds like a military family or at least connected to the military.
Almost the same.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because we talk about shadow work and, I want to ask you about your shadow, like the results of your shadow work. But one thing that's just interesting is how these models of the human psyche, they work on different levels in such a way that obviously we see ourselves as individuals at this point in history, and so we can look at our own psyche and we can look at it as a model, and there are these different pieces that we can point out. But also, if you look at the bigger groups also operate on this same model, and different people within the group end up playing different characters or archetypes, and we end up following different ideas. But the idea that you grew up then to be an anti-war activist is just so fascinating, because that seems to me like, especially anti-war, that seems to me like something that everybody should be able to get behind, anti-war.
I know.
But it's one of the war industry and the way that this country was built on top of war, and it's continued to be a country, predominantly built up by war. I think that is one of the aspects of the American shadow. It's this thing that it easily gets brushed aside by people who want to be overly patriotic or overly prideful about their country, or who just want to position the world as good versus evil, and that we're the good and that there's evil out there. But
Because God is always on our side.
right, yeah, yeah. I think that it's just fascinating that like Vietnam was in the 60s. I mean, we had World War II, which seems like it was important that we step in. Like it did seem like there's an evil in the world that's threatening the peace of the world. But ever since then, it seems like our country has just gotten into one war after another, after another, after another. And even with the stuff that's going on today in Ukraine and in the Middle East, I mean, those are in essence American wars. And it's a way for us to continue behaving as if we're the world's savior, as if we're the good guys. And I think that more and more people are waking up to this, and there's more and more pushback against this idea. But it's just fascinating that it's still something that it seems to be largely in the shadow of the American conscious.
And I appreciate how you're calling that. I hadn't thought about that, about a country having a shadow work needed. As you were speaking, I was thinking too, in the we were in the shadows, you're saying, of World War II. Well, after World War II, we had the big American dream. Everybody was going to have a white picket fence and it was going to be all beautiful and wonderful and whatnot. But I was 13 when President Kennedy was assassinated. And that, I think that really shocked my psyche. And I think it was the fall of the American dream at that point. I think it punctured something in that in that little bubble
Yeah.
that we lived in. We're
Did you
so great.
see did you see that they're supposed to release the documents today?
I did.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it at all, but I just saw that they were going to do that. And
Just don't hold my breath on any of it.
I know I feel the same way, but if they really do release all of the documents unredacted and like we can see everything, it seems like that could be a good step towards that type of shadow work as a country.
Well, absolutely. I agree with that. We need to be transparent. And, our government needs to be more transparent. I'm not saying that they need to give us all their trade secrets. I mean, yeah, we do need to have a certain amount of secrecy so that we can be secure. But we all need to, yeah, you messed up. This messed up. We got to heal. We need to have our eyes opened to the reality of what's been going on in this country. So I'm hoping that that is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, me too. Um, so we talked a lot about shadow work thus far, but I'm curious. We talked kind of about your process, or like the way that you went about a lot of it was just writing poetry, your books, putting together your thoughts on notes. What in your life could you describe like what the results of that work has been away from your creative side, but just in your personal life, your interpersonal relationships, the way you feel about yourself or see yourself, the way you view the world? How has like what's the benefit of shadow work on that side of things?
Well, the benefit of shadow work, if you're doing this on your own, because a lot of people would probably prefer to do this with somebody that is, I guess, versed in the process and to help them walk through that. But eventually, I mean, at first, when I found myself in dark places, I'd be going, what's wrong with me? Do I need to go to a psychiatrist? Should I, what do I need to do? But I found that it was something that I could use as a self-help to return to. Okay, so here I am. I'm in the shadow again because you don't graduate from shadow work. I even have a blog on that, the relentlessness of shadow work. It's a, I think it's a learning process we have to go through while we're in this body. But there is a an upward mobility in that each time you go through the process, then you will take what you've learned and move forward. So, what did I learn from it? I've learned a lot more patience. I'm not saying I have a lot of patience, but I've learned to be more patient with myself. Um, and I feel secure in my current belief system. It's also that's very helpful to me. Um,
If you don't mind me asking, what is your current belief system, or how, like, what's the architecture that you've put together for yourself?
yeah, I'm a ceremonial magician.
Okay, I love that. So you have a very specific way to describe it.
Yes.
What does that mean, and like what is your uh, what's your process or your ritual? What does it actually look like to be a ceremonial magician?
Well, there's many strains of ceremonial magicians you could get into, like the Golden Dawn, or you could get into various forms of, it's also known as high magic and opposed to low magic. And what it is you are actually relating to divine entities. In particular, for me, I have a belief system with the archangels. The rituals are, and I'm going to just stop here for a second and go back on the ritual situation. Is I love ceremony as much as anybody else does, but you can get stuck on ritual. So I look at the rituals that are, I guess, recommended rituals and, time honored rituals of that belief system as a training ground, kind of like a basic training. And you learn that process. And then when you're in the throes of the battle of life, you don't have to stop and go through the rituals in order to get that support. You learn that the you learn that that energy, and that's exactly what it is you are drawing energy from um, well from in my particular belief, I'm drawing energies from the archangels, and then also you have like a absolute, and my absolute is Jesus. I have not taken him out of the he's very much a part of my life, and I think that the absolute, the Godhead, wants us to have that energy. They're spoken of as messengers in the Bible, but it's actually an energy. They're not, angels are not fluffy winged characters. I mean, they can be if they, want to show themselves to be that, or they could show themselves to be, you know, like a human. But basically, it's an energy. And they're a lot more powerful than people think. That like their energy could go, like 50 feet out or more. But that is my belief system. That's how I tend to keep myself in check. Um, I do go through a lot of breathing exercises. The fourfold breathing is very important within my belief system.
What type
And
of breathing was that?
it's like your fourfold breathing. You breathe in at the count of four, you hold the
Yeah,
count of four, then you breathe out to the count of four.
yeah.
I've been through a lot of different yoga classes and whatnot, and basically, most people teach that you breathe in, all the good energy and hold it, and then you breathe out the negative energy. And I don't think that's what it is. I mean, I guess that can work as an exercise, but in my belief, when you breathing in the the positive energy is really, it's not ushering out negative energy, it's transmuting the negativity in you to positive energy within you. So that positive energy transition or transmutation takes place within your body so that when you breathe out, you're actually feeding your aura. So you become like a battery, you're the breathing is more like charging your battery. And though so you become the light of the world, you're able to um if you're, let's say, when you're talking about getting, the shadow work and how you move through it, to meditate and go through these breathing exercises and to come to an understanding of whatever your particular problem is, and to work through knowing that you can transition this out of yourself and also feed the energy into the world by doing these exercises, then I think it becomes profitable as a good path in your life. So.
Yeah, I think breathing exercises, connected to meditation, this kind of thing, it's very fascinating to me because for a number of different reasons. Like when I left my religion in my early 30s, throughout growing up in a church, I'd always assumed that I was having spiritual experiences, but it was literally after I had left my religion and I just went into the woods and did like a breathing kind of I spent the whole day kind of just meditating. And it was probably the most spiritual experience I've had. It was definitely the most spiritual experience I'd had up to that point. And it really kind of shocked me. But I think that, oh man, so I know that a lot of people who have like a spiritual practice outside of a specific religion, particularly like Western religions, Christianity and such, meditation becomes a big part of it. And what I discovered was that it almost seems as if everybody should discover their own meditative style or their own breathing style. Like I like the way that you talk about it as, if you think about the world, like breathing in is positive energy and breathing out is negative energy, in a sense, you're kind of like saying that you're like a negative energy factory. And you don't
like you're the opposite of a tree, you're not.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't have to think about yourself that way. Maybe for some people it works because it's just the mental process of it that kind of cleanses them out, like emotionally, spiritually, energy wise.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I like the idea that you've kind of landed on your own interpretation of it and it works for you. What I discovered that was really fascinating for me was like when I first started doing breath work or any kind of meditation, I was like kind of looking for different ways to do it. And I found a couple different like guides online or through an app or whatever. And a lot of it was about the air I was breathing in and then just focusing as it went out. And what I discovered, I read this book. It's a really short book by this author who's one of my favorite religious historians. Her name's Karen Armstrong. She's fantastic. But she wrote this little book called Buddha. And it's just like a really quick historical synopsis of the Buddhist story, like the story of the Buddha and the development of the religion or like the philosophy or practice. And she talked about how when the Buddha was meditating and trying to achieve nirvana, one of the things that he would do in his meditative practice was to breathe all of his air out and then sit for as long as he could without breathing back in. Just sit in it. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like, I've never heard meditation described that way before. And so I was like, okay, I'll give that a try. And so for a while, I would sit in the morning before anybody else was up, and I would do this meditation where I was breathing everything out and then just sitting in the emptiness of it. And I found it to be the most effective meditation that I've ever done. And I think it's probably different for different people. And that's what I've discovered over time, is that it's almost like if you find the right, kind of like what you were saying, is if people can get hooked, like caught up on rituals. But if you find the ritual that works for you, it can be like that recharge that takes you forward. And then also what it teaches you is that in any moment, you can just fall back on that in that moment, and it works for you. So in my case, and I don't want this to be prescriptive for anybody else, but in my case, I've always been an introvert. I've been an extreme introvert.
Yeah.
And yeah. And, to understand the distinction between introvert and extrovert, there's a pop culture version of what that means, which basically, if you go ask anybody on the street, what's an introvert, what's an extrovert, they're going to tell you that an extrovert likes to be around people and an introvert doesn't like to be around people. And at some level that may be true, but it's a very shallow understanding, because what people discover is that introverts actually really like being around other people who are deep thinkers.
They're selective.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then they start coming up with these ideas of like, well, you're an extroverted introvert. And it's like, okay, this is just getting a little silly. Carl Jung actually, he's the one who coined the modern phrase introvert and extrovert. And the way that he describes it very succinctly is that introverts think in their mind. They navigate life through their mind, meaning that they interpret everything through their own self. And extroverts navigate through their body, their feelings. And so they interpret themselves through everything else. It's just like different ways of interacting with the world. And
objective and subjective.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So what I found for me as an introvert who always spent time in my thoughts, I was very comfortable with my thoughts, very comfortable in my mind, but I was often dissociating from my body. I was avoiding emotions. I was avoiding uncomfortable sensations. And so this form of meditation where I just sit and I just breathe completely out, and then I just sat there in it and I just felt my body. In a sense, it's like it's like just being with your body in a way where you're not trying to control it anymore. So you learn to just accept it and feel it. And that's what I mean by, like, you take that ceremony, that ritual, that practice, whatever it is, and then you're in a moment that's uncomfortable. Like maybe you have to deal with, you get some bad news. Maybe you're like in a social situation where you're not comfortable. Maybe, you're in a situation that's difficult just because you've got to overcome something. You can take that same realization, that same learning, and just go, oh, just don't fight it. Just like sit with it. Just feel it. And once you feel it, it'll pass. And that was what was amazing for me. But to take this like another step further, the way that I think about meditation, or more the way that I think about breathing, and the reason why I think breathing has turned out to be such like a big part of most Abrahamic or Judeo-Christian practices, is because breathing is actually a really good symbolic experience for life in general. So we breathe with our diaphragm, and to inhale, it's an active process where there's actually a muscle like pulling. That's all muscles pull. And so your diaphragm is pulling and it's creating more capacity. And so the air comes in. And so breathing in is an active process, which is kind of like the masculine or ordering side of the world, or the ordering side of life. Breathing out is actually just that muscle relaxing. So it's not an active process, it's a releasing process. And so that just letting go and kind of accepting and being, that's kind of like the feminine, or just the more, it's like the more agreeable side of life, where you're not trying to control things, you're just accepting them for how they are. And so this process of breathing in and breathing out is actually very much like the yin and yang of existence. And so what I found is that in a lot of the meditative practices and breathing exercises that I had seen, there was more focus on the breathing in, which is that control side of life. Like you're trying to manage life, you're trying to be in charge of life. And as an introvert who was just always in my head, that's how I had approached everything. And so I needed to release. I needed to just not be in control, just relax and just feel whatever was there to feel, and not try to, not try to control it. So for me, this is just a long way of saying that type of meditative practice really helped. And it's literally how I manage every difficult situation now. I don't try to, get strong and grit my teeth, white knuckle through anything anymore, because I've learned that really the better way to get through it, that's going to be less painful, you're going to manage, for me, I'm going to manage it better, is to just relax, just feel it, and it passes. You get through it.
There's such a big push for the teachings of raising your vibrations. And I was thinking not very long ago about this, that I don't think we're supposed to be raising our vibration. I think we're supposed to be lowering our vibration, like what you're talking about. And then you get into the scripture, be still and know that I am God. We don't know how, if we're like hyperventilating through this, and not that that's necessarily what the vibrational teachings are saying, but you can actually hyperventilate yourself with these breathing exercises. I've seen where people, I don't know if you've seen some of these, what do you call the extreme breathers? They put themselves up on YouTube, and just looking at them makes me tired. But yeah, I think we're supposed to be still. And when a problem comes up, then it's best to just take that deep breath and try to, as best you can, to relax, because you're not going to think straightly. You're not going to be thinking straight if you are, in an emotional state, anger, frustration, fear, sadness, whatever the emotion. And also, I find that, when you're getting, like when you get in the shower, water's a great cleanser. And that's a great time for you to do meditative, uh, cleansing exercises for yourself to, a lot of times I'll put myself through a mental ritual, um, just as a cleansing, not just for the body, but I kind of want to come up out of that shower a whole person. So yeah, I look forward to that exercise as far as keeping myself in line.
Yeah, that's there's also the religious symbology of cleansing through baptism.
Yep, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's what I think, like the second step in your spiritual alchemy is the dissolution. It's like, you're going through that water bath. So,
Alchemy is something that I'm really interested in, but I've never taken like the plunge and really explored it. So I've always just caught little glimpses of it through other writings, through people who reference it. A lot of Carl Jung's writings will reference alchemy. He even described it as probably one of the most complete myths. But I don't
I think
know.
it's shadow work. I think it is, in essence, alchemy is shadow work.
Yeah, so but you mentioned earlier you kind of briefly just talked about the different steps. Is it pretty consistent, those steps of I think you said you go from
The chaos.
you go from the chaos and you burn it down with fire. I don't know, just real quick, walk me through
Well,
an alchemical
I'm just going to
process.
give you the first major four, and that is you go through the fire, and that's when you're that's literally the destruction of your ego. And and just as a sidestep on that, you really can't get much creativity unless you let go of your ego.
Oh, I believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can address that at another point, but and then their second step is like water, and that's where the ashes are dissolved, and that's like the uncovering of your subconscious. And that sounds like a comforting thing, you know. Oh, well, I'm going to be cleansed with the water, but I don't think it's a comfortable thing, and I'll tell you why. Okay, so like I'll just use a little story. I had a cat that I loved, and she scratched me on my hand. I had to go to the emergency room because, I was trying to give her medication, and she skedaddled across my hand, and I'm sitting in the emergency room with my hand laid open, top of my hand, and they come in there to clean it. That does not feel good. What that does, what that cleansing, what that second step is it's like opening or it's clearing the way so you can see what's going on in there in that subconscious of yours, you know? So your third step is being the air, and that's where you isolate the various elements of your outer self, of yourself, the parts that you want to keep, the parts you don't want to keep. And so there's a lot of introspection that goes on there in the air, and that's actually called the separation. And then the fourth step that I'll relate to is the conjunction, and that's the earth element, and that is where you begin to balance. Your male, female, your above and below, your opposites start to find a balance. So those would be the four major steps that I would relate to. There are more, but basically you're trying to, make gold out of a base material.
Yeah, absolutely. I
And
mean, the sim if you so I think about like how we as humans we often interpret myth or symbology literally, and by doing that it gets us kind of in trouble. So with alchemy, that's a really easy one to see, because like you're saying, the base elements, the goal is basically to turn the shit of your life into gold.
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
and when you take that literally from from a chemical perspective, that's where you get all these people in the Middle Ages like trying to turn, sometimes it's lead, but just trying to turn other elements into gold literally,
mm-hmm.
which completely misses the point, because it's something that'll never happen and you've kind of wasted your time. But when you
But
do it,
it's a physical thing in your body. I mean, like the way you think, you're changing your way of thinking while you're doing
right,
this.
exactly.
So
So
you're actually restructuring the chemistry in your body.
yeah,
It's a real process.
no,
It's just,
I believe
you
that. I
know,
think the literalization of it is the problem, but I see all of these myths and these practices and things, they're actually psychological or mystical. And so, like you're saying, you can take that thing in your body and you can burn it down and clean it and add some soil and let it get some fresh air. And it becomes this. I've experienced it in my life. I wouldn't say I've done it in that. When I look back on it, I probably did do it in that process, but I didn't have the terminology at the time.
sure, yeah.
But yeah, I see all these things as very psychological. And like you were saying earlier about alchemy not having or no, you said with shadow work, there is no end to shadow work. It's like this process of just slowly refining yourself, or another way to think about it is like you've used the word balance, like just balancing yourself over time so that you're not too hot, you're not too cold, and you're kind of aware of yourself and you're conscious. And even though you're always going to have things that come up either internally or externally, there's going to be difficulties, there's going to be challenges, but the path isn't linear. I see it more like a circle that just keeps going and going, but you're getting higher. Yeah, you're getting higher and higher on each rotation, such that when you encounter those same things over and over again, you have a little bit better perspective, you have experience, and you can work through them in a just a healthier, more helpful way, both for yourself and for the world.
Yeah, you have something too to fall back on that is concrete, that you've developed yourself that you can work with. So yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that you have a lot of kids and a lot of grandkids. I'm guessing that you have great grandkids at this point.
I do.
Yeah.
I have 6 children, 10 grandchildren, and 3 great grandchildren.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
At this point, looking back, if there were some things that you had to bestow for them, like things that you would give them, knowledge, wisdom, guidance, what would you say to them?
That's a I guess I don't have anything particularly I can say because I believe that would be individual to each individual of the persons, what their particular um, personality is, what their interests are. So um, I think that I don't really want to say to have patience because we all know that when we want patience, we usually get tribulation. That's a myth. It really is. But you always hear, don't pray for patience because
Yeah, yeah,
you're going to
yeah.
get tribulation.
Yeah, but at the same time, you can't. It's not like you can say you have a virtue. What you can say that you exercised a virtue in a moment, but you can't. You don't really possess virtues, so
Yes,
you
true.
can't really say you have patience without that thing to test
I
whether or
don't
not you
I
have
don't
it.
have any I don't have any of those. And I guess I just try to listen as best I can and respond as best I can. And I am not a perfect person. So, you know, I don't really feel I don't try to share my religious beliefs with my family. Some of my family have the same thoughts that I do, some don't. I don't think it's important for me to, like I say, proselyte somebody into my belief system so much as my belief system should be able to meet that other person where they're at and kind of see, a little bit like our conversation. Where's it going to go? How's it going to go? There's no way we can anticipate what the questions, what their needs are, by saying this is going to work for you. I know that as I was growing up, in my belief system, my dad's answer to my changes was we're just going to agree not to talk about religion and politics, okay? you know, so not everybody's going to meet you with that same acceptance of whatever advice you may give them. And basically, youth is a rebellious stage in people's life. They want to try to do things their way, and I kind of think people don't really become mature until they're like in their 30s. They and that's loosely said because some people can mature earlier. I mean, some people don't mature at all, and they're still in their terrible twos when they're 60. But um, yeah, I don't have a particular advice that I could, pat answer that I could give in that regard.
Okay. Well, I don't think you kind of avoided giving specific advice, but in a sense, it's almost like you just kind of let everybody know, like just be yourself and be accepting. So
Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. Mina, I really appreciate having this conversation with you. The hour went by really fast, um, but I think it was really great of you to share your story, and I think we covered a lot of interesting ground and a lot of valuable ground. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
I so appreciate you having me.
Yeah. If people want to find you, they want to find your blog, they want to find your writings, where can they look to find
I have a
your work?
website called The White Rose. I'm also on Twitter, or it's always Twitter to me, on X, in there that has a link to my website, and from there, you can link into where you can purchase my book.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.